Great. Well, thank you. I've only got one kind of big update today. As we were just talking before the meeting, Sue Lassard's finished her kind of phase one recommendations report, which Sarah, the deputy city manager, and I have reviewed. I'm about to share it with the finance team. So I won't go into too many details yet because I also want to have Nate and Ashley have a chance to look at it in more detail, as well as we're going to start interviewing Leah and Deb from the organization in finance, and Sue's kind of continuing to work on into phase two, which is sort of the in the weeds phase. But just sort of a general update. The initial findings are kind of, we have the audit report, right, which has its findings in there. This, to me, is kind of the work plan to attack the audit report. And we're going to take Sue's recommendations and kind of put them into a few different buckets and a new sort of action item, I think, document to kind of guide progress moving forward with the council and with staff. Some of them are in the sort of policy changes, just things that were internal policies that were put together, some of which really don't even have like substantiation documentation behind them. So some of them are like in the ordinance changes, things that Sue kind of feels like should be updated in our finances as we've grown. I think one of her big things is, as she said last time, the finance department wasn't created, it just happened. And the way she looks at it and with her experience, she's like, this is a small town finance process. She thinks there's tons of efficiencies to be made in ordinance and policy and process changes to really free up Leah and Deb and the whole team to efficiently process and reconcile all of our accounts so that we can kind of move into the modern city era. That's going to mean, so the ordinance changes, policy changes, probably some training as well, some specific areas where express training is needing, and not just in the finance department, but kind of across departments in City Hall, including the city manager's office as well in that process. I think that's one of the big reports is, finance needs to be the hub of the wheel, but also all managers need to be deeply trained in Excel in their own policies and procedures and reconciling and taking ownership of their budgets too, that this isn't, finance is the hub of the wheel and is in the approval process, but every little piece, needs to kind of be more native to the departments themselves. So, and then all of that will so we'll have some timelines and some deliverables on specific buckets for training, for policy change recommendations, and then ordinance change recommendations. Some of them will involve city council needing to probably vote on some things, but some of them are just more like, let's have a dialogue and discussion, I think, when properly placed in the finance committee dialogue. And then over all of that, I think, as Patrick mentioned before, is like a new policies and procedures manual for the finance department that, here it is. It's no longer, it happened. This was designed like this. Here's our process and design recommendations. And I think we'll be, pretty much in terms of policy and process near perfect going into this next fiscal year. And Sue's also on the flip side of that's going to start helping out more directly in the reconciliation process so that we can deliver it to RHR Smith for the FY25 audit, which, we've already closed out that year, that we can deliver them all the information they'll need. So like the audit process itself will be a lot simpler. They'll have all the data they need. They're not going to have to, go on treasure hunts for it. And then they'll be able to come back, test a few environments to make sure the numbers make sense. There's no fraud, there's no waste, how budgets met expectations, true undesignated fund balances, a lot of this stuff we heard from RHR last time around. My hope is that, again, 25's already closed out, so there could be some recommendations, but that we sort of get ahead of the next audit too. And it's like, hey, here's the recommendations we saw in last year's budget, but our teams can just point to, here's our action item list. We've already implemented all these changes. Here's the new process and policy documents. So I'm really excited about that. I think as Sue's mentioned, it's the hub of the wheel, and we've made an enormous amount of progress over the last year and a half, and this is, I think, kind of the final piece. That's going to be really important for council too. As I mentioned before, we really haven't had an undesignated fund balance when I've been here. I've never asked you guys to, in some ways, maybe that's kept spending a little tighter in some ways too, because I don't just say, hey, let's just take it out of the money in the bank until we know expressly what that dollar figure is down to the penny to the month. We're sticking within our budget from what council passes, and But there are times when unexpected things come up, like this Karsk family piece we've been talking about. I'm still looking into some of the legal ramifications there. I know we have a scheduled November meeting, but if we need to expend funds there, that'd be $100 and some thousand potentially that we'd need to account for and send out. And I'd want to know exactly how that hits our undesignated fund balance or what reserve it would come out of. So those are the types of things that, with a fully reconciled, perfect finance account, I think are going to help the city council make wise decisions going forward. So.
Great.
So that's it for me.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd like to speak on that a little bit, Charlie, and as nice as it sounds to get our house in order for the next audit, I would just like to remind everybody that no matter how good you are, an auditor is an auditor, and they are going to dig and dig and dig. No matter how good your books are, their job is to dig. So I would just throw out a word of caution there, and I'm all for what you said, but don't think for 1 second that the auditors aren't going to go on a digging session. You're not going to hand those books over and say, "Oh, gee, you're wonderful." Auditors are here to dig, whether you've got the best books or the worst books. They're here to dig,
Yep.
and that's their job. And I'm not against that.
It's a good point, Steve. I talked to a citizen who's long experienced in Ellsworth and was on lots of boards and commissions, and I was like, last week was a great week in the Ellsworth American, talking about a lot of big initiatives. The week before was a little tougher. We had the audit recommendations, and he's like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, there's these pieces. I wasn't here for 9 months of that fiscal year." And he's like, "Don't worry." He's like, honestly, he's like the recommendations, like that's what auditors are supposed to be there. You have $4 million in undesignated balance. That's 3 months to spend, and like that's what they're there for. And to your point, Steve, the goal is obviously more perfect. I've heard of some of these perfect audits where there's no recommendations in the state of Maine, but that's what they're there for too. I think in some ways getting our books better is also, like I've mentioned before, if I ever found any malfeasance, for me looking back 3 years is just misfeasance, not process. But having better and better books also allows you to be able to catch that malfeasance if it's really there. And we're always on the lookout for that. And of course, council, if it ever came from the, hey, this is a bad process, to, hey, this was like, I'm not quite sure where this money's at, I will notify you immediately. And these audit findings haven't been in that category yet, but we want to, that's really the end goal too.
Well, the good thing is with auditors is they are going to dig, and I know Charlie and I are big on transparency. Let them dig. Obviously, we'll fix the errors that we need to, but nothing's going to be exposed that we don't want to expose. Because, like I said, I'm open and transparent for everything that we have. But yeah, I'd agree with you, Steve, on that. And just to piggyback off the Sue Lassard, I know she worked with Ashley and myself on reconciling the taxes, which we got up to date now. And then today, actually, we're meeting with her this afternoon. We're going to look at the water and sewer. So Sue's already hitting the ground running with us, and I'm excited to learn more and obviously be better and deliver those clean books to RHR. So that's some stuff we got going on. Just a reminder, next week, Ashley and myself will be out at Cassell training. So we won't be at the Finance Committee meeting next week. We will have a warrant, though, just so everyone's aware. We will have a warrant next week. The week after, which is the Columbus Day week, because it's a short week, and Deb and Leigh are going to be at a training on Thursday, we will not have a warrant the week of the 16th. So that's just a reminder. It was mentioned last week, but I just wanted to put that out there again. So that's all I got.
I have a question for you, and it's not a criticism in the least little bit. Is the end goal to have the warrant at this meeting on Thursday mornings, or is that not the goal? The goal to keep it the way it is, and we get the warrant after the meeting? Is there a plan to move that around or not?
Going into the schedule change, the plan was we would not have the warrant available. I did say to the team that we would revisit if that's not working out for the team. We figured we could keep it all electronic and present it to you guys afterwards for digital signatures. But that's open for discussion. If we need to change that, we would just have to move our timing up a little bit during the week, so.
I, for one, would like to have the warrant here, but I also supported the 4-day work week. So
I can,
Let me package that into maybe Sue's. Let's talk about that because it's a big process change. It also involves like how the bills are paid and when the staff's here to kind of process. And you know, as I mentioned in Bucksport, I think they have had a different piece where it was like the council chair and the finance chair were had to sign off. They didn't even have the larger process. So, but if she was like, hey, if you restaggered this, maybe we could have these meetings on a Tuesday, and it's kind of they process the warrant. I'd want Sue just to kind of weigh in on how
Okay,
that.
so the prior, there's something about the timing of the prior, yeah.
Well, if the answer is no, I fully respect that. I just would like to know if that's in our sights. It would be nice to have it here at a finance meeting. I know I used to like to look at it the evening before and then maybe thumb through the real paperwork if I wanted to dig into something. But if that's off the table, I can live with that too. I'd just like to know if this is temporary or if there's a way to do that.
I've never viewed it as being off the table. Like I said, it was one of those looking to go the digital route. But if it's something that the council and the committee want to see at the finance committee meeting, if we keep it that way, we would just have to adjust our schedules to account for that, and that's something that we are able to do. So I'm not saying it's off the table at all.
You know, I'm gonna just pull this. I've got the shared edited document on the phase 1 report memo, and we'll just add this to kind of the process considerations.
The one drawback to how we're doing it here is if we have questions about an item on it, there isn't an
Yeah.
opportunity for the public discussion before we do the signature. So I think what you were alluding to, Charlie, about having the warrant on Tuesday for the prior week may work for staff and give us the time
Yeah, I think
to be
that
able to review what it is we're signing off on with more time.
yeah, maybe talking to Sue too. This is kind of like the recommendation. What is the goal of the finance committee and the
Right.
council in that process? Because yeah, that's opportunities still exist on a one-to-one level, right? Hey, I have this, but what we're missing out on here is the group kind of discussion about individual bills.
Right.
You know, and is that, I don't have any issue with that. We publish them. These things are
Right.
available, and every counselor, has that opportunity to still do that.
And
So
I
the-
would say, and also to have the time for Nate or Ashley to do my question, what are the red or green flags? Is there anything this week we need to be aware of that's unusual, same as with the monthly finances? So I'm not gonna review over 100 pages of lists of invoices. but-
Right, and because that's what, in some
Well,
ways, what
because
it
we
is.
have-
It's a
we
ma-
have staff who do that very well, but let me know if there's any quirky things happening or good news to share in something related to the budget. I think that's more, I see that more as our role than checking individual invoices.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what Sue is as well. As we're getting to a bigger city, sure, in a small town, you're in a select board, you have a stack this big to go through. It might make sense. When you're a city, with a stack this big, hey, we want to show it all. Nobody's trying to hide an invoice. We want perfect policies and procedures.
Yeah.
But that's also maybe when the new council see, the finance committee rules and kind of how that works out can also be considered. I've talked to Sue on just how she's structured it in other cities and towns in Maine. They're all very different. So how are we getting, I could see this next cycle too with council and this finance committee meeting, we're being much more tailored to like the audit change recommendations, policies and procedure manuals for finance, really having the council and others be involved in like, this is the process, this is what every little dollar that comes through here, that's one of Sue's big pieces, is that to the penny. There's no, close does not count in finance. So if we go through that, and I think council is more aligned with like, wow, this is a wildly robust, modernized, trackable, transparent system, there'll be less of like, let's look, which in a past piece of the organization, like that was really needed. And hopefully we can get to a new sort of steady state of the organization where, we're doing higher level bond conversations, long-term debt financing, those pieces and.
I would echo that from my work in my day job. I have a finance and development committee, and we spend 10 minutes on, here are the finances, and again, here are the things noteworthy, and they get the P&L and the balance sheet, and then our memos on things. The rest of the hour is spent prospectively looking forward. How are things looking for the fundraising and other work for the nonprofit? So again, if we've got staff in place who knows how to do it, transparency, yes, but not the expectation that we're gonna roll through all of the details, just that you all have handled it. It is, I mean, transparency is for others to look at is perfectly fine. But for us to be able to look at the bigger picture prospectively, I think is gonna be the best value for the
Totally.
city.
And I think that's a very long way of saying maybe, Steve.
Well, and, you know, the combination of both is nice. You know, the electronic part is wonderful. It's never been this good. But if
Are you
we
talking
could,
literally wanting the paper handout?
what I'm,
Or
what
just
I'm,
having the information?
no, what I'm saying is this. I like the electronic version that we get. Since Nate and Ashley has been here, there's no surprises, and none of you probably know this, but there was none of that when I first got here 4 years ago, okay? There was a stack of paper when you got here, and that was that. And then all of a sudden, the stack of paper went away, and it was all electronic, and you could dig into all the scanned invoices to view it before the meeting. And that was very clunky. I think it was in the old system.
Munis.
Munis, okay. It was very clunky, okay? And so it went away, and then it got to be so clunky that it came back, so there was a combination of both. And you folks are giving many details ahead of the meeting until we changed your schedule by shutting down on Fridays. So in a perfect world, I would like to have that email that you do currently. You're doing it Thursday afternoons, whatever you're doing it, okay? There's a little too much pressure to sign that to make sure the dough flows to the vendors without having the stack here, so when you look at it the night before, you could thumb through that stack and find that one document if you needed to, which is rare, but it's nice to have the stack here. So my request, if possible, would be to get that on Wednesday nights, or whatever you guys decide, but ahead of this meeting and have the invoices here, just to look through easily. Your emails say we could call you but, you know, when you look at it, Thursday evening at 7:30, and everyone's gone home, and if you don't sign that, it's gonna raise hell Monday morning, I would assume, at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock. So if there's a workaround for that, I think it's important. If there isn't, I respect that, because I did vote to go to a 4-day work week. So if I have caused some of this, then I'll take responsibility and I'll figure out how to work around it.
I think it's something open for discussion. I'm not opposed either way. So let's circle back as the team. Charlie, Sue,
Wrote it
Ashley,
all down in
we
the
all
memo,
look at this
so
and
we'll,
see what we can do.
you know,
Good.
we'll keep it in kind of a broader, hey, how do we make best use of this time moving forward now that we have such an expert in designing these pieces? That was the other thing the citizen said about the audit findings, and it's when he saw the note that Sue had been hired. He's like, she'll get you straightened out.
Oh, Steve, also really quick, because I know you mentioned it last week's meeting, so I just wanted to bring it up. The Surrey Road project, I know I
Yes.
sent you that pay rec.
Yes.
Just want to make sure you didn't have any questions
Nope.
in regards to
Thank
that.
you.
So,
Thank you very much.
Okay.
That was helpful. And again, we signed and I asked the next week.
yes. Yeah.
So there's a case right there that it could have been done a little easier before it was signed. But
Okay, just making sure.
But you had what you needed on that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Charlie, if you're done, Nate, are you finished?
I'm done, yes, thank you.
Charlie, I would like to request some information about REPICs. If I understand, that's an acronym for Real Estate Purchase Installment Contracts. And I would like to know how many active REPICs we have going on in Ellsworth.
Yeah, I will,
To clarify for the record, my understanding of that is property that has been foreclosed upon, but there has been a workout where the former owner can stay in the property, pay the current taxes, and work on the back taxes. I believe that is the spirit of a REPIC, but I need to be educated on that.
yeah, 100%. I don't think there's a ton of them. I know I've talked to Sue about this before, but I'll have her drafting an email now so we can come back to finance committee meeting and
Yeah, I'd like to know how many,
how many. And there's
how they work, the mechanisms of it. I think it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think there's some MMA guidance on this as well, on REPICs, and,
I don't care about MMA. What I care about is Ellsworth.
yeah, but this is for the process for
I
the city.
understand. I understand.
For moving forward, there's some best practices with REPICs. And yeah, there's the abatement process, which we talked about, I think, a couple of finance committee meetings as well, for hardship when somebody has an unexpected, financial hardship where
I
they.
understand that, but what I'm talking about is the REPICs. I want to know how many we have going on in Ellsworth. I understand your point about Maine Municipal Association has some guidance. That guidance doesn't necessarily mean that's what's happening in Ellsworth. What I want to know is how many REPICs we have going on in Ellsworth. And I want to know the process. How does it happen? It's obviously, an abatement releases you of the obligation. A REPIC, I don't think, does, from what I have read. I think that they have to keep current on the taxes going forward and work on the back taxes, and they're allowed to stay in the property. That's my understanding of the spirit. I would just like to hear that process here and how many we have.
Great. Should we open it up to citizens?
I think that's a great idea.
Nothing? All right.
No,
Well, I got
no,
plenty of
Mr.
stuff to get
Wilbur,
through.
I see that hand almost going up. Teach us something.
Morning, Jared, resident. So I've been sort of diving into the current rents for the Erkey building and looking at those and kind of basically looking at that versus the profit and losses on the building and kind of looking at possibly the proposed price increase and where that would put us on the fiscal year. And with the current rented spaces in the building, with the current increase in base rent or square foot rent for that, it's still looking like it might be a sort of a negative balance at the end of the year. And with 1,180 feet that is currently being rented out of that space, and from the spreadsheets, it didn't really look like a lot of that was allocated towards the lab spaces. It really puts me back up here on the podium being like, we really need to look into possibly relocating the program to another building, and then look at that asset of, okay, well, you're looking at a 3,000 square foot building, what's the fair market value? Do you just lease it as a whole building? Do you sell it? I do believe that there is a value in the program. I don't believe there's a value in that program, in that building.
Excellent questions, and I'd love to involve you, Jared. I know I kind of lean on you for a little bit in the YMCA, and I think we're getting pretty close there on, the next level. I think we're coming at the workshop. We're going to talk about like true costing that building. So here's these tenants, and you've been a big help in that process to how to kind of get to that with CAM fees and dividing square footage and those pieces. And now, on the next workshop meeting, thanks to in large measure the work of Jared and Roddy, we're going to be able to have those figures and say, hey, here's what it costs for the Y to be here, so the city's at kind of a net even. Here's what it costs for Friends in Action to be here, so the city's at a net. Here's how it costs, and here's what it costs the city and the school who's there to have that. So essentially, now, I think I won't preview too much there, but there's one organization particularly that, they haven't had a rent increase in a while, and that's going to be to have them basically pay for what it costs for them to be there, for this nonprofit might be a substantial jump. And that'll be a discussion for the council if they want to do that. But to your point, Jared, like these are nonprofits providing senior services, childcare, daycare, all these pieces. Like I feel like that's a public value that is, for the city, for the community, that is very defensible, and it's kind of a question for council on how much they'd like to subsidize that. I think to what you're getting at, Jared, there's another piece is like, how much does the city subsidize like shared office spaces? That's a different, to me, category of, the nonprofits, the social services, daycare, senior centers. So how do we get at that true cost for the Erkey building in the same way that now we're doing the Moore Center? So that here's the true cost of what is to be here. Do we pull rents up? Are we at least covering our costs so it's a net even for the city in the near term? And then over the long term, is that highest value for this? Even when we get it to true cost, if we do a $30 million, village partnership initiative, 9-to-1 state federal match to city money for, $3 million and $27 million from the state and feds, that creates a river walk between the marina and the downtown. That'll probably increase a lot of parking needs there. And we're going to need more space for the community and people to be there. And do we want to take care of this asset at a loss, or could it be recreational purposes? Could it be a food hub? Is that the higher value? But in the near term also, like, let's stop the bleeding as much as possible in that building, so it can be net positive. And we can, kind of like the YMCA, probably come back to council and say, hey, here's where we're at. Here's what it would take to true cost this building with the current types of tenancies, but then also consider, are there higher uses for this building in a variety of ways? That's sort of the plan for Erkey once we get through the Y piece. I know Tracy and our consultant down there who manages the building and Twyla, our economic development director, are already starting some of this work. So Jared, I hate to lean on you, but I might lean on you a little more once we finish up with the Moore Center, which is sort of the bigger potential cost than the Erkey building, which, and I was hoping we could kind of move some of that into Moore Center, but the Moore Center doesn't really have good space. We don't really have any other city spaces for to potentially relocate those types of tenants elsewhere, so.
I've been kind of overlaying some stuff, and depending on if certain tenants at that building want to or can pay the 150% increase to what they're paying now. Anyways, I've been overlaying, and it might be something that down the road might be able to work, because if you could add that income with your profit and losses on the Moore Center, you'd be almost a wash on it. And then you could rent the Erkey building, and the profit could go into a capital improvement fund for the Moore Center, which will be needing a lot of maintenance right off in the near future.
I want to just echo, I think this is the kind of conversation we need to have, and we've talked about it at the council level. It's two different things. It's the Erkey programming, and then it's the highest best use of that building, same as with the Moore Center, what you're working on.
Right.
And that there's been work, has it been all of 2025, to bring the operations within the building to a higher profitability, not profitability covering costs at this point, while also developing what should the programming of the Union River Center for Innovation be. And I think in that context, I want to give a shout out to Erkey for Saturday, the Food Fest that was sponsored in the Parklet, where we had, I'm going to say, trying to remember, Grow Smart Maine was one of the vendors. There were nonprofits and businesses and like the Soil and Water District talking about the food systems in Ellsworth, and this thing was sponsored by Erkey. I came expecting how many people are going to come through. It was during Autumn Gold. There were hundreds, a couple of hundred people came through in the course of the 11 to 4 that we were open. I had minimal time to sit and look for something else to do because there were constant conversations happening. So maybe as part of the conversation, have Tracy Sheckle report on that as a programming aspect of Erky. That was a tremendous success. The businesses that were selling food and such were looking for, okay, what do we do for next year? So it's an example of, again, the programming of Erky and the pivot, like where they fit in the food systems is one really good conversation. And then the other is what's the highest and best use of a city-owned riverfront property
Right.
next to the harbor. They don't need to be co-joined as we move forward. So it's along the lines of what you're looking at.
Totally, and to double stamp kind of the work of Tracy, I mean, she's been doing a lot of that already, trying to, when I arrived here, a year and a half ago, and then getting deeper into the budget, he was like, what's the budget on Erky? It's kind of like, point to the just general line items. I was like, what are the how's the rent side of this? Like, answer is like,
She's been
I
on her own
don't,
scavenger hunt.
I don't know, and it's been like and when is the last time somebody did know? And it's like probably 5 or 6 years. It just kind of, that, there was no sort of defined process for how much the building is. It was just sort of, I think, Steve, you mentioned, just sounds like a $50,000, I don't think you said scavenger hunt, but like trial. And so we need to be able to, just like the Y, come and say, here's what Erky costs, here's what the rents are, here's what the like down to the the dollar and the detail on utilities and all these pieces, and then make a consideration on, like, we do get a great value, to your point, on the food fest was great, the business programming they do down there for
Right.
small businesses, having a space. Ellsworth doesn't have like a shared office space environment for people to work on a very smaller business. So there is a value to that, and the question is like, here's how much exactly it's costing the city to the penny. Could there be a higher use of the value, especially with this riverfront property that the city can consider? Is this, the original expectation with Erky was that it would have a biotech focus. That hasn't worked out, and we are shifting that that lab space. I think even the people came from the main bio, I can't remember their, but they weren't even literally willing to put that on their like biotech list of labs in the state. It wasn't up to level. So are we going to make it a big investment in that bio hub? It's, it didn't seem to spark a big, we love Jackson Lab, but it wasn't like I think the original intent of that building that would spark kind of a biotech, done tons of different businesses in Ellsworth, and that hasn't come to fruition. We're about 10 years out. So how do we relook at this? True, we are getting some income from these shared office spaces, which is kind of what it's gone into. Let's maximize that in the near term so that capital asset isn't continuing to depreciate and just mothballed and cost more money while it actually is bringing in income. But then what's the long-term solution here? So.
Right.
I'd like to back up a little bit on that subject if I could. When I arrived here 4 years ago, I was very naive to the city finance and all of that. And one finance meeting, the Moore School story came up, the Y talking that it was going to expire in August of 24, and there was a conversation, and back then the finance meeting wasn't recorded. It was a little square table down here, and I was hit like a ton of bricks when I found out that the city had borrowed $4.7 million to renovate the Moore Center, and that there was a huge debt on that. And I was uninvolved, didn't know, and I was completely shocked by that. That brings me to this question. That building originally was used by some state agency, correct? Health and Human Services, maybe, or something.
No, I think it was a school before.
Are you talking the
Moore
Erky
Center?
building?
The Erky
Oh,
building.
Erky. I thought you were talking about the
building,
Moore Center.
Yeah, that was
I'm trying to follow as well.
Department of something. Yeah, they're up on the Christian Ridge Road now. At the
Okay,
beginning.
but originally they were in that building, okay, which I would call some sort of state agency. And I guess my question is this. Is there some debt on that is going to hit me like a ton of bricks? Has that been renovated? Is
So there was a-
tons of debt? Did the city buy that from the state? How did that go?
So I don't know about the purchase or whatnot, but I know that when the city took it over, 10 years ago or whenever it was, I believe they dumped about $250,000 or so into capital improvements and renovations and roofs and whatnot. And I believe there were some water issues on the left-hand side of the building with drainage and that sort of stuff. And then the generator.
But that
stuff.
wasn't finance?
No, I haven't seen any debt finance on Erky moving forward. It's just what we're providing now. And I will say, I have 90% confidence in this, which means probably inaccurate, but I believe it was like $175,000 to buy that parcel, and then what you said was right about a $250,000 is kind of the city investment. But we should, just like the YMCA too, where we have the debt service on there, we have kind of the other costs, but we should have that as like what's been spent on Erky. I might even be able to do a look back. There was some flooding there a few years ago. Like when we're thinking about this building, we can't just say like what it is moving forward, but like how much is it costing as a depreciating capital asset over the last
So
few
the
years.
city bought that building, is what you're thinking?
I'm pretty sure the city
Yeah,
bought it.
I'd like to.
Or actually, and the EBDC was involved with it, so I got to.
I'd like to dig into that. The other thing, when the discussion about the why started, and you got thrown right into that mess up front, and you extended that for a year, and now we're working on it again. And I totally understand. That had to be low priority with all the stuff that you had when you got here. However, the Y has come here and presented their side of the case. And I wonder if the tenants should be invited to present their side of the case like the Y was.
So
Because,
they've been here at the last couple meetings, the Friends in Action, and I think.
no.
Oh, he's talking for Erky
Erky.
business.
Oh, for the Erky.
Erky.
Oh, okay, sorry, I keep.
Because we've heard, in order to make a decision, I think we need to hear both sides of the equation. And we've seen that with the Y, with the Music Institute, with Friends in Action.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that from the tenants at Erky, because I'd like to hear their side of it. I probably am not super in favor of their side of it, but I want to hear it. I want everyone to hear what they're doing, and I think it's important that that come out in the open.
See, I love that idea, Steve. I think in some ways this why piece, in some ways low price. It's funny. It was on my initial top 5 things I wanted to accomplish here. And yeah, when you arrive at a place and you think these are my top 5 things, and you arrive, you're like, these are actually my top 5
Then
things.
you actually open the closet door.
Yeah, and I have one just giant finance thing, like it's totally unreconciled. Hasn't 3 years of audits haven't been done. Like, okay, what? But also the why has been an interesting one too, and like how complicated it was under the original agreement, and unwinding from that, and then working with the why. We had weekly meetings with Matt and I for a while, trying to iron this out. How can we modify the contract, and really kind of coming to the place where it's like, okay, the city needs to take this back and then charge all of the tenants essentially what it costs to be there, or at least getting to that place. And I feel like we're establishing a good structure for how the city manages the building, considering use of the tenants, making sure they're involved in the process. And I love the same, once we kind of get a little further down the road with the why, maybe with the Erky doing the same kind of template here. And then also bringing back in EBDC. We've had our consultant had some conversation with them. This was sort of their partnership with the city. So like, how do we have EBDC, the council in the future of this piece? Like, let's do kind of how things have gone, wrap up over the last 10 years, what's currently out, like Coastal Enterprise Inc.'s there, a bunch of other great groups that are doing amazing things to kind of, the workshops that have been held there, to your point, Steve, like, we oftentimes get to the finances and making sure this, and that's really important, but like, what's the impact? What are the groups that are doing there, accomplishing in the community, and, that's important too.
I want to see what they're delivering. Maybe, honestly, I don't know what they're doing there. I've never stepped foot in the building. Shame on me for not doing that. Perhaps that should have been part of the new councilor tour with the city manager. Since that was a funded thing for the city, maybe that should have been a stop for new councilors to go to, and it wasn't, and I've never taken the time to go. Moore Center wasn't on the list either. I have taken the time to go to the Moore Center, but I just want to hear what the tenants are delivering to the city of Ellsworth so we can have a balanced conversation.
And, I totally agree, and I'm trying to upgrade our kind of counselor onboarding with the big binder and those pieces and the tour, and to your other point, and like, yeah, at the time, when, that's another great piece.
I'm not complaining, but there's a great chance for improvement on the new council coming in to get a better tour than Casey Hansen and I got when we came in.
Yeah, and I think that's to your point, Steve. You've heard a lot now, and you can kind of, that would be a good piece. I'd also now, I'm hearing like Michelle yell over me, Charlie, there was like the governor was there, the senator was there, and, I think there was grant funding, because at the time, this type of thing was hot. Like municipalities, these these innovation centers, I've seen them like in a lot of rural communities in my campaign days.
It's like the industrial parks that were supposed to be the solution, and
Right. And now, like, food service, honestly, is in kind of that category of, like, hey, food networks. And so, like, so to me, this next project, too, like, hey, that was the hot thing then, to have these kind of, small innovation centers in cities in rural America and struggling areas to kind of, and some of them worked out great. Some of them haven't necessarily worked out. There was some federal and, I think, state investment, too, here. So let's do some accounting on that piece. And I think that'll be part of the moving forward process, too. Like, whether it's recreation, whether it's could remain this. We could stay in this kind of shared office space, but what are the costs? What are the grants out there? How do we move forward? I know in the food space, there's a lot of grant funding in this category right now, so.
right. And the key, the work that's happening now is, does it make sense? Is that the right fit? Where is the energy
Yeah.
to build towards?
Heck, we might even have
This is
Steve
what
say
we're
like,
doing.
oh, wow, there was a lot of federal money that came into this. It's not a huge debt service on it. Like, all right, I have a different perception than this, than the
That's what I want.
$26,000 a month we spend in the Moore Center.
I want to hear from
So
the
you're saying
people
that-
we're affecting.
Right, so you're saying that is part of the next workshop, have Tracy present, and then others. When you're saying tenants though, Steve, you're talking about the service providers, not the individual businesses that rent space.
I'm talking about anybody that's at the Erky building.
Okay,
That's
So
what I'm
open it
talking
for
about. What
those
is
who want
Erky?
to.
I want the public to know what Erky's about. I don't know.
Yep.
I think I know, but I haven't taken the time, and if the Y, the Music Institute, all of the tenants at the Moore School have come and presented their case, I would like to hear the tenant's case in that building, so that we hear both sides, not just, to your point, a financial spreadsheet here. I want to hear the whole thing. If we're going to dive into it, if we're just going to let it bleed in the corner and not dive into it, then that's fine. But if we're going to dive into it and we're going to spend your time trying to look through this and help the city, let's do our part. Let's have those people speak to us, maybe at a workshop.
I think a workshop would be
Yeah.
a good piece, and I think, not to, if, with your permission, I'd like to kind of, we'll keep that focus on the YMCA right now. I know Tracy and everybody's still working on it. Let's
Yeah.
tie a bow around
I'm
that
with you.
new piece. And then with the new council seated, maybe we're looking at like December, maybe it's January.
It's fine.
Then we start digging into Erky, and in some ways, Steve, like you're right, like that, we do that process similar to what we've done with the Y. We can get to a new higher level of like transparency, understanding of the finance, highest use for the building. We may not agree perfectly on exactly what that will be, but we'll get to kind of, that next step with Erky, and it's a big asset of ours. We need to
I don't
figure it out.
want to, yeah, no, but I don't want to punch a tenant in the nose until we know what they're
let's
doing.
not punch anybody in the nose, just as a suggestion.
Well, financial, that, I
Well,
look
we
at that
can-
as
we
if
can
you're gonna
decide
bump
there have to be
somebody's
different
rent
processes.
crazy, I want to know what we're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Without punching them in the nose, just.
Yeah, and and then honestly, there's some other pieces too. And in the capital improvement plan, there's going to be a lot of this. What do you want to do about Pump House Point? That's the big depreciating
That's
asset.
another, yeah.
Could be sold. Could be turned into a parking lot. It's this very historic building. People I think that would not be the highest use for that one, especially. Erky is not exactly historically as a building, but Pump House Point is like iconic on that piece of Leonard Lake. It's a beautiful brick building. So, but it's a very big depreciating asset that's just kind of sitting there, and it ain't getting any cheaper to fix or
I was
figure
gonna say,
out.
The longer it sits there, the less attractive it is for.
So we'll wait, and there might be other pieces of this in the capital improvement plan that maybe that's kind of a template here. We start taking them one at a time. We figure out the priority of biggest impact, most cost to the city. That's Moore Center first, Erky, and then we go through all of our buildings. Maybe we even get to the highway garage at some point.
Derek, Jared, I feel like we took over your time. What, did we, did I especially, was there more for you to share with us on that? Did we interrupt that process in your mind?
No, my goal was had. I wanted to have a conversation about it. Like I said, I'm not against the program. I just kind of, looking at the numbers, is it the best location for that program? And, is there a better way to bring in revenue to offset other programs or capital improvements, or is it? But basically, I came up here just to get conversations going about it.
Always a pleasure. I not to, but I still remember your was it impact fees or development fees up at WS and that whole area up there. Like that's on our ordinance changes. I want to do a deep dive on that. That I'd also that's going to be a big one. The consultants moving forward on that, but the ordinance stuff I think is going to be a big piece. It's
And
not necessarily-
parking,
What's that?
the parking ordinance.
Yeah, parking, size of parking lots, heights of buildings, there's kind of, this first piece is really gonna be stuff in the comp plan, business attraction plan that we're, development fees, those pieces, like what's not making us business competitive, that we can change. There's some other things too, I think we could consider. I know my orientation is to deregulate as much as possible. Others might want, hey, we need to add some, like we've seen some things that, are not right for Ellsworth and we need to, update that regulation. We're going to talk on next Monday on not allowing bikes on sidewalks, e-bikes on sidewalks. I think that is a regulation the city should consider for safety, and we don't currently have it. The roosters that are, right downtown, really, essentially being very disruptive to people that live right next door, and roosters aren't allowed. Like maybe there should be some more teeth in allowing code to issue fines and not just mean letters to not have the rooster. So sometimes some good government regulation is needed to keep people safe and to keep them like their lives not impacted by.
It's about appropriate, effective regulation. Is it something we want to regulate? Is this the rule that gets us the outcome we want?
Right.
Balanced with incentives so that people are functioning well.
I like that balance.
Well, thank you. You guys have a great day.
Thanks, Jim. John, anything? No, I'm good. Awesome. Cool.
All right.
All right.
We're good?
Great. I've got a couple things from both Nancy and Steve in my office, just real quick.
Any chocolate?
What's